Hi, welcome to our show today. As always, we're grateful that you decided to join us. I'm joined today by my co-host, Susan Bainbridge, and I'm also joined by a longtime friend as well as colleague, Donald C. Bliss. He's a licensed clinical social worker, and Don works with Susan and I throughout the summers usually. Occasionally he comes as in the winter and he does a little bit of work with us. Don has actually been a therapist for over 30 years, and he's worked a lot in mental health and substance abuse areas. He's also loves to travel internationally and nationally. He is working right now on his memoirs, and I think it will be an incredibly enriching story about his life. I hope after you hear about it today, hear a lot about what he has to say today, that you will think so as well. Today, we want to talk with you a little bit about our shared experiences. We've spent a lot of time talking with you about the sacred and about selfish relationships. Today we want to talk to you though about shared relationships. In particular, we want to talk with you about how those shared relationships impact our self-acceptance. Because we know that if we feel valued and loved by other people, we tend to value and love ourselves. And we can pretty much accept who we are and who we were created to be. But if we get messages in society in terms of who we are as a people, as a race, as gender, as our sexuality, we learn to be ashamed of who we are in some way. So we want to explore that a little bit today, and we're going to have some open dialogue with both Susan and with Don about that. Don in particular, in addition to being a therapist who has a plethora of experience with working with gay and lesbian and transgendered individuals, Don happens to also be a gay male. So he's going to share a little bit about his story, his coming out, and particularly I would like to look at a couple of different areas today. One being how society and how media has shaped who he is or who he believed himself to be early on in life. And I also want to talk from this perspective of our religious organizations and denominations and how they in some ways impact how people feel about themselves. But before we begin our dialogue, I want to just highlight a couple of things. And this clearly is not to beat up on any particular religious organization or even beating up on any other organization, but it is important for us to talk about what's really happening in society. I think that we're beginning to see a little bit more on media and on television. We're beginning to see a representation of people who are gay and who are in same-sex relationships, who are raising children. But even when we look at some of the shows like Modern Family, I love Modern Family. I think it's a great show. But some of the critics have said that even with shows like that, the gay couple is desexualized. We don't have that issues when we talk about straight couples. But they also mentioned that Cam seems to be the punching bag, the punchline for all the laughter on there about the gay couples. And so I think that we need to even take a look at media and say, how does media shape and inform our thinking about who we are? That's why we talk about shared relationships, because we don't exist in a vacuum. And then as it relates to religion, we know that in many particular religious denominations, people are just adamant about saying homosexuality is wrong. So we want to be able to look at those issues and see how does it impact people in their lives and their acceptance. But I want to point out two just really wonderful pieces that I came across very recently. And I'm sure there are many others out there. But if you are a pastor, it is very difficult to express your opinions sometimes about your views on homosexuality, because there are numerous people out there willing to shut you down when you begin a conversation. But a pastor by the name of John Pavlovitz wrote recently a beautiful, beautiful article about if his children were gay. And I'd like to just share some of the points with you. He said, if I have gay children, you'll know about it. In other words, he said, my children won't be our family's best kept secret. Two, he said, if I have gay children, I'll pray for them. I won't pray for them to be normal. I've lived long enough to know that if my children are gay, that is their normal. Thirdly, if I have gay children, I'll love them. I don't mean some token, distant, tolerant love that stays at a safe arm's length. It will be an extravagant, open-hearted, unapologetic, lavish, embarrassing them in the school cafeteria kind of love. And if I have gay children, most likely I have gay children. If my kids are going to be gay, well, that's pretty much they already are. And he goes on to explain how God has already created them, stitched them together in their mother's womb, and so that is who they are. The second person I want to highlight just really quickly is Otis Moss, who was talking with a friend, and he wrote a letter to a friend, and it was in response to gay marriages or marriage equality, to be more precise. And what I love about what he said is that we as people of faith should live our faith, not legislate our faith. Be more than a one-issue community. And he says that when clergy hides behind poor biblical scholarship, it is as sinful as unthoughtful acceptance. And then finally, he says, when we make biblical claims without sound interpretation, we adopt doctrinal positions devoid of the love ethic. The ethic of love should cause you to examine your reposition. So I invite you today to be thoughtful throughout this conversation. I also invite you to share your comments, as I'm sure you will have many. But I would like to start our conversation out today really just learning a little bit more about Don. Now, I've been friends with Don for over 25 years, so I know a lot about Don and his history, but I would like him to share a bit, because one of the things that always comes up when we're having this conversation, particularly from a spiritual place, is people having this whole discussion about gay people not being created in as gay people, and it's a choice. So I'd like to start our conversation a little bit with Don talking a little bit about his experience, his self-acceptance, and religion, just incorporating all of this in there. But I'll start out in particular by asking you, when did you first know that you are gay or were gay?
Well, for me, it was a little bit later than for other people. I didn't realize until I was in my early 20s, and I was actually married at the time. It started as a light bulb went off in my head one day, actually. I was pledging a fraternity in college, and we were, you know how pledge classes are told to do this, told to do that. We were told to do a study group in one of our pledges rooms, and he took a shower and came out of the shower, and there he was with his towel wrapped around him, and literally, for this first time ever, I had a sense that I was curious about what it would be like to be with a man intimately like that. And
do you think that's what they had in mind when they said a study group?
No, I don't think so. I don't
But you
think
did
so.
study a little bit that day, right?
Yeah. And so I sat with that. It seemed to me, I don't want to say it seemed normal, but as I struggled with that, I thought, well, he's another human being. Why would I not be able to recognize that he's attractive, just generically? But the longer I sat with it, the more I recognized that it was a curiosity about being with a man sexually. Mm-hmm. And so eventually I felt like I needed to act on that curiosity and explore it and see what it was about.
So I know that for you, because I know a little bit about, know a lot about your life in terms of just your experiences. Now, you mentioned a couple of things that I'm sure stopped a few people, that you were engaged at the time.
Yes,
that
I was engaged to be married. Mm-hmm.
Engaged to be married. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. But prior to that, even before your college years, you had some thoughts or questions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I was growing up, and even today, unfortunately, one of the worst insults you can hurl at someone is to call them a fag or lessy. and it starts in elementary school, from the kids who are picking up messages that this is not okay and this is a horrible thing. And so I was called that from a very early age, because partly I think because I was a late bloomer physically. My peers all developed, my male peers in particular, developed more more male musculature and body hair and that kind of thing long before I did. And so I had a curiosity about the male body because their bodies were different than mine. And I remember an incident in the locker room when I was, I think, in high school, where one of my good friends, we were taking showers, we were going to take showers, and he had taken off all of his clothes and was walking toward the shower, and I turned, and there he was with body hair and, like a male kind of, more masculine kind of, adult masculine kind of physique. And I went, wow, what is that? Because I didn't have that. So I had a sort of curiosity, but it never felt like a sexual curiosity. It never felt sexual. So I was aware of sort of a curiosity, for lack of a better word, and was called fag many times, but didn't feel like it was something that identified me and that I was.
But I think you're saying something really critical, though. There are a couple of things there. One, in terms of what children do with calling you names and how that can impact you. Now, you obviously had a pretty strong ego and sense of self, so it didn't impact you negatively. But for many people to be called a fag or a sissy, because I can remember all those things from when I was in school, how kids called one another that, those things stay with you for years.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it did impact me negatively. It was very painful. But I suppose in some way I dismissed it because, again, I was a late bloomer, and it was I just felt like it was, a way, for lack of a better word, to bully me. Mm-hmm. And I was smaller, and I wasn't into sports, at that time anyway. I later developed more of an interest in sports and physical activity and physical health and all that. Even in high school, I participated in sports eventually, but none of the brute sports. But it was painful.
Mm-hmm. So it's painful, right? You're explaining that it's painful, but you didn't necessarily internalize it as you being gay because they were calling you that, whereas some people do question that, because I've talked with and worked with plenty of people who will say, well, when I first came out, I didn't know if I were gay because that's what people had called me and shaped me in that way, but It sounds like you're saying something different. You just thought they're being mean and nasty and bullying, but it wasn't a part of your process. But I think the other thing that's critical in terms of what you're saying that I think it's important for young people to hear, which is sometimes you're just curious about another individual's bodies, and it doesn't mean one way or the other that you're thinking sexually about it, and that's okay, because who wouldn't be?
Right.
When you're growing up and you see people starting to bud and shape and develop this and develop that, and you're not developing it, that's okay to be curious about it.
Very normal.
Yeah.
Very normal.
Yeah. So now, could you speak to us about? You said you were married. Well, you were engaged to be married.
I was engaged. So I thought, okay, well, and even as the curiosity developed, I thought, well, okay, this is normal. It's just a part of sexuality. I can recognize that maybe it would be fun to be with somebody else, or a different kind of person, someone of a different gender. But it didn't feel like I was gay. And I don't know even to this day if it was because I was just so repressed, and it was so repressed by culture, by my socialization, or whatever. But it took me a while to realize, and through exploring my sexuality and being with men in that way, I realized that no, this is part of who I am.
So you're just kind of skipping all over the fact, though, that you were married. You skipped from I was engaged to be married, and then I explored my sexuality. Yes. So were you doing that while you were married, or?
Well, no. Okay, so my wife and I. So I
Like,
got
you don't want them
married.
to think that
right.
you're just completely just like, oh, well, I
Yeah.
got married and I'm just.
Well, so I got married, and then we separated for problems that are unrelated to sex or sexuality. And I realized there was actually quite a significant amount of physical distance between us. So I wasn't able to see her as often, every day or every other day. It was a little bit challenging, and she was also working in a residential program, so she was living in the program, and I couldn't just go over there. So there were some complications with our seeing one another, but I also realized that it was an opportunity for me to explore that curiosity. And so I began to explore that curiosity, and I distanced from her, and she sensed it, and at some point she asked me what was going on, and of course I said nothing. I said, no, everything is fine. I'm just busy. I just can't come out as often as...
No pun intended, right?
I just can't come out and see you as often. But then eventually I did tell her,
And what was that like for you to have to share that, to first accept that this is indeed who you are, and then to share that with a loved one?
Yes, well, getting back to coming out, the coming out process is first and foremost to ourselves, for people who are gay and realizing some new information about their sexuality. We first have to come to terms with it. So I first came to terms with it and realized, no, this is not something that's not going to go away. This is something stronger than just saying, oh, I can recognize that he's physically attractive to, in general, to everyone, to other women, to whatever, to women, to whatever. And no, it was more than that. And when I did come to terms with it, I identified as bisexual because, of course, I was married, and sex was not an issue in our marriage. And so I first thought of myself as bisexual. And when I came out to her, I took her to a park, finally decided that it was enough lying, and I took her to a little park in the city where we were living nearby, and told her, and she did not react well, as one might imagine, and said to me that homosexuality is pathological, bisexuality does not exist, and I needed to go get therapy.
Well, you might have needed therapy, but it might not have been for that reason. Because, of course, as therapists, we all think that we all can use
Everybody can use
right?
a little therapy, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So
did you go get therapy?
Well, I did. I did, and I had a very good therapist who actually said, he sensed my own, he had a sense of my own process of self-exploration and where I was in it, and that it was not, I wasn't in denial about anything, that I was, so he basically mirrored what I was saying to him, which was, you're doing what you need to do, and it's okay. And he affirmed my process, which was very powerful for me, of course, at that time.
Was he a gay therapist?
No. Mm-hmm. He was a straight man. As far as I know, I think I knew at the time that he was also married, which, I mean, he could have been bisexual, I don't know. But it was a very positive experience. Probably much to my wife's chagrin, because I didn't get the messages that she perhaps wanted.
She was hoping you would get fixed.
Yeah. I believe so.
But so in her defense, now I did not know her then, and I only know of her now because I don't think we've ever met in 25 years.
I don't think
but
so.
Because I know that you're still friends with her, but in her defense, that she has changed her views over the years, because we
Yes.
don't want to leave our viewers with this thought that.
Yes, hopefully we're all evolving and all growing, and with more information, and that she got, she definitely, her views evolved, and that's important for all of us. The more information we have, the more we grow.
Yeah. So I wonder, though, and Susan, anytime if you want to jump in with this as well, I'm kind of just thinking about what her experience must have been like, and how do we help people who are supporting or really just dealing with their own stuff, right? Because if she's in a relationship with you, it's really about her hurt and her pain more than it is about her accepting who you are, right? So I think we have to distinguish between those things as well, is that sometimes when people say things, particularly when they're hurtful things, it's about their own stuff
Yeah,
and less about you. But how do we help people? And I know that we as therapists can speak to some ways that we've helped people. And Susan, you can of course chime in from your professional opinion too, in terms of how do we help families deal with accepting their children, accepting their spouses, right? And we're only talking today about accepting their spouses as being gay, but there's a whole list of things that we could really talk about in terms of self-acceptance with sexuality, with gender, with just a ton of things. So how do we find it?
I think one thing that I'm also, I guess, curious about is how. So obviously it was not easy coming out to your wife. I'm guessing, as is true with most gay, lesbian, bisexual folks, that there are some people in your life that it's easier to come out to than others. I want to just ask a little bit about what was your experience coming out as bisexual. I mean, we're saying that you now identify as a gay man, so that was just kind of a part of your process. And I'm always interested in the experiences that some of my clients have had and others that I know have had with not being accepted either by homosexual or by heterosexual folks as bisexual. That many people believe, as your wife at the time did, that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I want to just back up a little bit and talk about how I had although the process was difficult for me coming out and quite challenging, I'm not going to minimize that in any way. There was, I had a core sense that I was okay, that I was a child of God, that I wasn't doing anything to hurt anyone else or to hurt myself. It was a very conscious process in that sense. As I was coming out to myself, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and even though the Catholic Church has propagated a lot of negative messages about homosexuality, they are also evolving. But I grew up with this sense that I was a child of God, and that as long as I was not doing anything harmful to myself or to others, emotionally, spiritually, physically, in any way, that what I felt at my core was okay.
And I think that's important. I know I'm interrupting you a bit, but I just want to say, particularly because we talk so much about the sacred and being in tune with the sacred, and being in tune with the sacred that lives inside of you, you paid attention to what your core was saying rather than paying attention to what the world was saying about
ultimately,
it.
yes.
And I think the great thing is that you were introduced to the sacred by your family, right? So you were introduced through the Catholic upbringing that you had, and what you internalized from that is that I am important no matter what.
Yes.
And some people don't. They'll internalize it for a while, but then when their religious group starts saying, no, but it's wrong for you to do that, then somehow they start to doubt that. But it sounds like you held on to that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to listen to that still small voice within and to be in touch with what's inside, just to go within and to be in touch with that and to push away the noise from society. And it's very much an internal process first. We first come out to ourselves before we come out to anyone else. And so I had that, I had a strength, there was sort of a grounding as I came out to other people. And my mother was very involved in my life. I she was probably one of the first people I came out to, if not the first person after I came out to my wife. And basically, she just took it as information, you know. Thank you for sharing. I'm glad you shared, and okay. And then she did her work, you know, on it and worked with it however she needed to. But I never got any, I don't recall getting any really strong negative messages from her about that. I had grown distant from my father and stepmother, with whom I had done most of my growing up. And so I told them, actually, I became director of the youth program at Horizons, which I believe still exists in Chicago. And I was featured in an article about gay and lesbian youth, featured prominently in the article. And so I was quoted, and I sent them a copy of the article. And that was the way that I came out to them. I heard later that it was a little bit challenging for them, but I also think that it was more challenging from them, and I don't know this for sure, but my sense was that one of the challenges for them was that they wanted the best for me, and they didn't know that this could be okay, and this could be the best for me.
And also to send them a newspaper article. I mean, that might have been a little difficult too, to receive that message, because that says a lot too in terms of whether we feel supported or not by the people in our lives. So, but I know you have a tendency to write and to just share things with people in letters, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's like, well,
Not just in letters.
Well, but I know, but there have been other things that you've shared,
Yes,
you know, in
yes.
letters, and you
Significant
think, well,
events in my
right,
life.
and so it's like, well, pick up the telephone, or
Right.
you know, I don't
Right.
know. I prefer a conversation about it, but
Yeah.
I do want, because Susan was asking you about the issue of, you know, saying that you were bisexual. Did you experience any sort of negative reactions in terms of that?
I did. I remember a dear friend. I still think about him to this day. And I lost a dear friend who just, if I were anything other than straight, it was not okay.
Okay. So it wasn't about
And
bisexual.
Right.
he was one of, yeah. I mean, it was anything other than straight, heterosexual. And so he completely cut me out of his life, and he was one of my 3 closest friends in college. And so again, I was just thinking about him the other day, and thinking about trying to look him up on Facebook, and wondering if he has grown and evolved, and wondering if he would be open to contact. I think, interestingly enough, when I came out to the man at whom I was looking when the light bulb first went off, who was one of my closest friends, he also distanced himself completely, and eventually cut the friendship off. He was, again, one of my closest friends. I believe that, in retrospect, that he also was gay or bisexual and couldn't deal with that within himself. And so, I mean, remember, I was very young. I mean, I wasn't as young as some people. I mean, many people are able to identify a sexual orientation from the earliest memories they have. That was not the case for me, but I still was quite young. I mean, there are some people it takes another 20 years or
Right.
30 years or 40 years to realize, and only in their advanced age they're able to recognize, no, this is a sexual attraction and I need to explore this. This is who I am.
But one thing I want to be clear about, because, you know, given that we're therapists and we often talk with people about coming out, we don't try to force anybody to come out, but we really talk with people about self-acceptance. You're giving a few stories about people who distance themselves from you, and quite frankly, there are going to be some people who will decide that they don't want to be with you because of who you are, regardless of whether it's sexuality or your viewpoint, people will say, I'm no longer going to be your friend. And that's really a travesty. It's a loss for them. And I think that when you're accepting who you are, you have to just go ahead and step out there and be who you are, even if it's going to hurt some other people or they're going to leave you, because that's their loss. And you and I have often said over the years, Donald, that what if when you had told me that you were gay, we had decided that we weren't going to be friends? Because I remember distinctly him telling me as if it were, I mean, it was a big deal, but it wasn't a big deal to me, right? And he just plainly said to me, you know, Tara Lynn, if we're going to be friends, I want you to know that I'm gay. And I just sort of looked at him and I'm like, and?
Oh, okay.
But I understood why Don had that perspective, because Don knew that then, as I am now, that I believed very firmly in the Bible and my faith in God and all of that. And I think that he was under the impression, though, that I maybe was, I don't want to say fundamentalist, because I surely didn't act that way, but just
knowing that how
people,
important your faith
my
was,
faith was.
you know, Christian faith was
Right.
to you, you know, it was a question, and it's very important for me to be all of who I am, especially with my dear friends and with the people who are important to me in my personal life, and to be authentic, authentically me. And so if we're becoming friends and I think you don't know, or I think, you know, it hasn't yet come up in the
Because
conversation.
honestly, I did not know, which is really interesting, right? Because when we kind of talk about people recognizing things, we worked on a psychiatric unit. Our joke is that he was a patient on a psychiatric.
Yeah.
But
where did we meet? Well, Don was in a psychiatric hospital.
But we both worked on a psychiatric unit, and the kids would often call him that. And it just was like way over my head. I just thought he was trying to be cool with his walk and everything. And because it just wasn't important to me in terms of just whether he was going to be my friend or not. But I think what's important for us to really get across to our TV viewers, particularly in terms of self-acceptance, sometimes we can have a fear of going to people and telling them who we are and what we think, what we feel, and what we believe. And we're under the impression that they're going to shun us. When in fact, when we talk about shared relationships, there are people out there who will support us through the process.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. And the fear is
that's
in
critical.
you. It's your fear. And if you're going to let fear stop you from living your life, I mean, you're not going to do anything. You know, you're going to live in a corner in a box somewhere or something.
Right.
But you know, a lot of the kids, going back to directing the youth group in Chicago, a lot of those young people, well, just getting quickly back to the psychiatric hospital, again, that's the insult. That's one of the worst insults that adolescents can hurl at each other, especially for young people who are questioning and are unsure, or maybe are sure but are not out. You know, so the kids would often say that, and you know, it was just what kids do. It is what kids do, unfortunately. But it was very interesting to me that many of these kids who were most fearful about their parents' reactions, in the case where they did decide to come out, had the most supportive parents possible. And unfortunately, some of the kids who were sure that their parents would be accepting and supportive kicked them out of the house. There was this there were these kids who started dating. These kids who attended the group who started dating. One of them was sure his parents would never, ever accept it. And one was sure that his parents would. Well, when the kid who thought his parents would accept it came out to his parents, they kicked him out of the house. And when the kid who was sure his parents would not accept it told him, they invited his boyfriend to come and live with them.
How nice. So the truth of the matter is you can get support from multiple places and multiple people. And one of the things I know that Susan and I have talked about a lot, particularly with working with clients and helping clients to be in this place of self-acceptance, is that it's not about us pushing clients to accept themselves or to tell their parents, because there are some very real issues that come with it. You know, You have to be prepared. Well, if I tell my parents, or if I tell my wife, if I tell whoever it is you have to tell, what are going to be the consequences? And then a part of what we do as therapists is that we work with people around the process of coming out, and then what will you do if this happens, and this happens, right? So it's really not our place. And I want to be clear about that, because if you're supporting someone who is thinking about coming out or who doesn't want to come out, then you have to let them be in the place where they are. But what I will say that I think is really crucial with self-acceptance is I've had clients to come to me and say, well, I just don't think I can be gay. But they are. And so that's when I work around the self-acceptance of helping them to see their lives, to see their experiences that they're having, to see the emotional things that they're going through, and say, this isn't a choice for you.
Yeah.
But often what happens is there's that religious piece in the background saying to them, you know, no, you can't be this, or their family or friends. And it's really a travesty, because I see the emotional toil that it takes on them. And so that's where I think as therapists, and you all can speak to this a little bit too, is that it's important for us to help people pay attention to that internal
Yeah, I
place.
think you're right.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's been really interesting to me as a therapist is seeing how folks are coming out younger and younger and younger, identifying whether it's as questioning or you know, as gay, lesbian, bisexual, wherever they are, you know, middle school, high school, you know, early high school. And it seems like a hopeful sign to me that not only are they feeling strong enough in themselves to go through that process, as hard as it is for most people, but also that they are feeling that it is safe to do that. That even in the places, I mean, we all talk about, of course, middle school and how brutal it can be for kids.
Yeah.
And even in middle school, people are coming out, and you know, perhaps part of it is that we're in a relatively liberal part of the country, and so maybe that it has something to do with that process. I don't know across, you know, other parts of the Midwest or the South or wherever, that I don't know if that process is as easy for young people, but it does seem to be something that they're doing younger and younger.
I think people still have their stereotypes, and I think people are still mean. But I do want to say two things, and one is this. We are not advocating for teenagers to have sex, so even though we're talking about coming out, that's not what we're advocating at all in terms of people recognizing their sexuality. But secondly, I think that it's important to note that when you are a teenager, you're often exploring anyway. You're often questioning anyway. You're looking, as we said earlier, at
so many things.
So many
too,
things.
not
So
just your
it doesn't
sexuality.
necessarily mean that you're gay because you find someone of the same sex that you're attracted to. Because I think sometimes with this particular generation, I think that what happens is people just explore. You know, I had kids when I worked in a high school. One minute they'd come to me and they say, oh, I'm gay. And the next minute they're like, no, I'm not gay. I'm dating such and such. Clearly, they were just exploring. And so we want to also make sure that kids know that adults know that. I mean, I remember once I went out with this gentleman who was very clear that he was not gay, but he told me he had had relationships with men. Now, that's a whole another topic that because there are a large number of, well, I'll say men, I'm sure women too, but I just know from some work that I've done, there's a large group of men who will say, I enjoy having sex with men, but I'm not gay. And so that's a whole nother segment that we could deal with. And I just want to point out, because I did not do this earlier, we are fully aware that when we talk about self-acceptance, that we could be talking about people who are transgendered or questioning as well. But we chose in particular for today to only focus on gay and lesbian, bisexual issues, because we know that this means that we need to have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 shows on this. We couldn't cover everything at one time. So I just really want to make that clear that we're really not trying to discriminate against any particular group of people. But back to what we were talking about in terms of just as therapists helping people to work through this process and what we're finding to be different today than, I mean, you've been in the business a long time, 30 years is a long time. I know you look extremely young and no one would believe you're a day over 30, but
Thank you.
But the truth of the matter is you've probably seen some evolution with this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to reiterate too that we're not advocating for anyone to come out, and that there are a lot of issues to consider, and people are in situations where it's not safe for them to come out, or it would present great financial challenges. For example, a college student whose parents are paying for their education, and coming out to parents may be a risk. So, I mean, coming out, there's so many levels to it. Starts with an internal process, coming out to self, and then who else do I want to include in that process? And usually it's friends and families. Sometimes it's work, sometimes it includes the workplace. I was never out at work until I moved to San Francisco. And I, in fact, was very closeted at work. I just generally believe that it's very important to keep very firm boundaries between one's personal life and one's professional life. Even though you and I met at work, I would have to see how someone was at work for a long time before I would invite them into my personal life or cross that boundary with them. And so there's so many practical matters, and even when, I mean, I was talking about these coming out experiences of the adolescents, but I just also want to be clear that we did not advocate at all for people to come out. In fact, we presented each group participant in the youth groups with a pamphlet coming out and what it was about, and we were very clear about, this is not something we're advocating. If you decide to do this, these are the things you need to consider, and be careful and be thoughtful about all of those things.
So I just want to interject something here for a minute, particularly just as a therapist working with people around coming out. There are times that I have advocated for people to come out.
Absolutely.
And I've advocated because I can see the emotional pain that they're in, but also because I'm listening really carefully at the things that they tell me about their parents. Sometimes, in some cases, the parents really know.
Yes.
They're just not telling them,
Yes.
I know that you're gay,
Yes.
but I listen to the words that the parents are saying. I listen to the stories that the parents give them as examples, and I would say to them, don't you think if your parents have supported you through all this other stuff, it seems to me that they would support you now? And I have people who are just adamant that they are not going to do it. And it's really painful even as a therapist.
They hold themselves in so
Exactly.
much pain. There are certainly people for whom there's a freedom available that they don't see and that they never experience because they refuse to come out. And getting back to my work experience, not that I think I should have come out, when I was living in other locations, but I had never experienced a work environment that could be accepting, and not only accepting but affirming and celebrating my sexuality before I moved to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, because there are so many gay, lesbian, transgender queer questioning clients, there's active recruitment of gay people. I mean, it's like we want gay people to come and work. I'd never seen that before. It's a different world, but it's a world we need to live in, because we work, the world is full of gay and lesbian people and transgender people and queer people and questioning people, and we need to meet people where they are. But you're right. I mean, as therapists, I think we do have a responsibility sometimes to say, look, this is something you might want to consider.
But I
And,
think
and they're so trapped in their fear and their pain, and that's where their suffering is. And they come to us looking for relief of that suffering, but yet they are so trapped in it, and they won't take that next step.
And I think that that's when we sort of push it a bit, because certainly we don't want to be the one to say, well, my therapist told me I should do this, and then something happens.
Part of our responsibility is to challenge
exactly,
our
but it's just about challenging them. Now, I will say this, because Susan said that we're living in an area where people are more accepting. I don't think Connecticut is all that.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, because that's our clients are in Connecticut, and often there's a challenge with them to come out. So while we may seem like we're progressive in Connecticut, I'm not so sure about that. I think a lot of people are still closeted. I think a lot of people are open, but given the fact with the people that we see in our office, and people still do make their statements and all of that. And it's funny, because when people don't know what perspective you come from, people will just assume things. Like, I know people assume because I'm a pastor that they know how I think about things. And it's really interesting for me when I work with people around this issue. I remember once I was doing a retreat with this group of women, and this woman said, oh, my daughter is dabbling in stuff that I never taught her. She's out here in the streets doing things that I didn't raise her to do. Well, I had no idea what she was talking about until she came to me later to tell me that she was dabbling in lesbianism. And so I thought, okay, so what am I going to do with this information? How am I going to address this issue? Because
don't let her get any on you.
I'm in, right, exactly. And here I am. I'm an invited guest. I don't know what the church's stance is on it, and so quite frankly, I just looked at her and I said, so this really isn't about your daughter. It's about you. Because you're worried about what other people are going to say about you because you have a gay daughter. And she said, I think you're right. And so from that point, we were able to talk. So I didn't have to have some particular stance on it, but it really was just about helping her to understand what was happening for her. And I think that that's also important for the self-acceptance process, to know that just because you've accepted who you are, it does not mean that the world is going to accept who you are right away, and you have to be okay with that. One of the things that I loved on Modern Family, when Mitch and Cam were going to get married, and Mitch was struggling because he thought that his dad didn't fully accept him. But there was a time in there where his dad said, look, I've done X, Y, and Z. Basically, can you meet me halfway? I'm old. So I'm not going to change just like that, but I've accepted him into the family. So come on, can you just cut me a break? And then it was beautiful, because at the end, I don't want to ruin it for anybody else, the marriage, the wedding. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's so important, no matter what it is that we want people to accept about us, we have to accept the fact that people are where they are in the process too. And let's work together on it.
And instead of focusing on what they don't do or what they don't say, look at what they do and what they do say. But I wanted to say something about the media. I think one thing that it has made a powerful difference in contemporary times is just there are so many images across the media of gay and lesbian and transgender people, especially with Orange is the New Black and the first transgender person on the Time magazine cover, and just all kinds of really, really powerful things happening. And I don't recall having any of that. And I thought in order to be gay, I had to be a certain thing. I'm sure that there are people out there who still think this way. And for me, one thing that was really important is I remember I had a Friday night ritual where I would go to this one particular dance bar, and I would position myself so that I could see everyone who came in the door, and I would buy my drink, and I would go, position myself, and I recall thinking over and over again, he's gay? he's gay. He's gay every time someone new came in the door, because they were all ages, they were all physical types, they were all different styles. There was the laborer kind of guy, the blue collar kind of guy, the preppy kind of guy. It was one of those bars where kind of everybody hung out, obviously, and didn't have a particular kind of clientele. It was one of those bars that was more welcoming, and just over and over again, he's gay. He's gay. We have to seek out, if we need to, where we're reflected. Places where we are reflected. After we have done our own self-acceptance and that process.
See, I think that that's crucial, but here's the other piece that goes with that, and that is the real fear of, so when I go to those places where other people who are gay are going, who's going to see me? So the people who are still trying to remain closeted, even when they've accepted themselves, still have to deal with that. And those are very real issues. I've had clients who've told me that they've been physically harmed when people have known. And so we want to say that there are some for as much as we've evolved in this society, people are still very hateful, very mean, and there are people who are killed all the time because of their sexuality. And I think that's important for us to talk about.
Even in the United States.
Even in the United States.
Much worse in other parts of the world.
Even in the United States, but particularly transgendered folks.
Yes.
So I think that while we're not talking today in particular about, and we do hope to have a segment on it, that transgendered folks are killed all the time. And so what I really want to emphasize, that even as we talk about self-acceptance, I think from that shared relationship place, is that it is crucial for us, even when we don't understand, even when we may not condone a particular behavior, it is important for us to always err on the side of love and compassion. Because who are we to judge people? When Don and I first met, and he, said to me that he was gay, and from my religious perspective, I said, well, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it's not for me to choose or to judge you, is what I said. And so Don took that as, okay, then she's workable. I can work on, because
really,
you just loved me so much, you just really wanted to hang out with me. That's what it was. But the point was, he didn't try to get me to say one way or the other, and I didn't try to influence him. And did it take some adjustment? Yes, it did, because
I accepted you where you were.
The first time, I was perfect. What are you talking about? No. But I will say it took some adjustment. The first time I saw intimacy between him and his partner, just in terms of hugging, it was something for me to get used to. But so what? People have to get used to who I am, right? And so we always want to err on the side of that. But we have come to the end of our show, and I always want to leave us with some golden rules to think about in terms of our self-acceptance. And many of them we've talked about today, but if we think about the sacred in terms of those golden rules, the sacred already knows who you have been created to be, because the sacred created you in that way. The sacred loves you unconditionally, so even when other people don't express that love to you, you have a sacred being that loves you unconditionally and equally. The sacred doesn't love one person more than the other. And then if you stay in relationship with the sacred, not with the religion, but if you stay in relationship with the sacred, that is what helps you to feel whole and accepted. But I do believe that it's important for you to find a faith community that will honor who you are, because there are faith communities that will do that. And quite frankly, even for communities who say that they don't believe that people should be gay, there are plenty of gay people in the church. So find a faith community that will support you. In terms of the selfish piece, take a moment to reflect on your own gender stereotypes. You heard Don say that he would go to the bar and he would say, he's gay, he's gay, he's gay. What are your stereotypes about who you are? Write those stereotypes down, and then think about how many of those stereotypes and beliefs negatively impact how you are living your life daily and what you think about yourself. And then spend some time learning to love yourself for who you are, not who other people think that you should be, but for who you are. And then in terms of the shared relationships, I would say find a trusted individual with whom you can share your thoughts and your feelings. You're not going to be able to share them with everybody because everybody doesn't have your best interests at heart. Find someone that you can share them with. And then connect with other individuals who share those experiences, which is one of the things that Don just mentioned in terms of going out. It doesn't have to be a bar. It could be a social networking group. It could be, again, your church, any place. But find someone, some people who you can share those experiences. And then don't assume that everyone is going to judge you because you don't know the perspective that they're coming from. And then, as we've said, allow others to have the opportunity and time to shift their way of thinking instead of writing them off. So those are the major things that I want to say to you. You can find those golden rules on our website, but I just want to know any final words before we wrap up in our last few minutes, any parting words that either of you have to say?
I think those golden rules wrap it up perfectly.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Susan?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. We invite you to find us on MetroCast every other Thursday at 6 o'clock. You can also go to www.sacredintelligence.com, and there's a link there for YouTube, and you can find all of our shows there in case you've missed them. We ask that you please, please, please subscribe to the channel, as well as like us on Facebook and share it with your friends. And until next time, we do hope that you will also have a peaceful and a safe holiday season as that is quickly approaching us. Till next time, bye-bye.